Hi, 8862 Heavy, Anchor Star. Good morning, Raleigh 7 right, clear to land.
All right, clear to land, John, 8862 Heavy.
The problem is that 7 right is full of snow. And because it's full of snow, there are a bunch of crews working on the runway to clear the snow. Typically, they work in teams like this to make it as fast as possible so the pilots can come in and land again. And the other problem is that the pilots of this 747 are not communicating with these people on the ground. They operate on a separate channel. So the communication that's happening between the air traffic controller in the tower, the people that are on the ground, and the pilots are on different channels. So the controller can hear, the guys on the ground can hear, but the pilots can't hear what's going on. So they get cleared to land. There's a bunch of people on the runway. It's going to be a problem. Check this out.
First, good morning, John, 8862 is 10,700, descending via the Nil 7 with information Delta.
John, 8862 have any Anchorage approach after Inc. Cleared ILS, runway 7 left approach.
Mr. Shank, cleared the ILS, runway 7 left, John, 8862.
Every time we're going into an airport, we pull weather and the information that's at that airport. It will tell you typically the runways that are in use for takeoff and landing, the current winds, the temperatures, all the stuff that we need in order to get the performance to land on that runway. And each of those informations get a letter designation. This one had D, and so he says he has information Delta.
First, good morning, John, 8862 is 10,700, descending via the Nil 7 with information Delta.
The thing is when they're cleaning off our runway, usually it's relatively quickly. So they're not going to, in the middle of winter, they're not going to say, oh, this runway for takeoff between this time, and this one's closed for this time and this time. That's not what happens. It says, hey, these are the runways they're landing, 7 left, 7 right, and that's it. And then they will clear their runways based off of snow. Like you'll see that a lot in Chicago. They're clearing multiple runways, so they'll tell you the runways that are planning for takeoff and landing. And unless you're restricted due to performance or things like that, then you're going to get whatever runway is going to be available, and they're just clearing them off as fast as they can with multiple crews. It's pretty amazing to watch, but that's what's going on. You're not going to know that that runway is going to be getting cleared off from getting that information. And as you can see, the runway 7 left and 7 right are pretty similar in length, but it's normal operations for the wide body heavies to be landing on this runway 7 right. Typically, the 7 left runway is used for takeoffs because it's closer to the terminal. So a lot of times the runway closer to the terminal they'll use so they can keep that flow of traffic for the takeoffs. They'll also land a lot of the narrow bodies on this 7 left runway, like a 737. This creates a very dangerous situation that we learn about in mostly the airlines. It's not really something you learn about in flight school, but I guess you should. It's expectation bias. And it's basically that it's what you're expecting. And if you're expecting something, you can hear what you want to hear. It's kind of like you see in the movies sometimes a guy, he's asking every girl out in high school, and so every time he asks her, a girl says no, 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 and when he asks another girl and she says yes, he still hears no. Expectation bias. He's been told no so many times that when he asks that girl out and she says yes, he still hears no. That's similar to this situation. Every time you come into Anchorage for the last 15 or 20 years you've been doing it, you're told you're landing on 7 right if you're flying a wide body like a 747. So you hear 7 left, even though you repeat 7 left, your brain is thinking 7 right, and you've already loaded up everything in the box in 7 right. The box is our computer. So when the controller tells him after Ank cleared 7 left, they're looking at this fix on the approach plate.
John, 8862 have any Anchorage approach after Inc. Cleared ILS, runway 7 left approach.
But if the pilots have already loaded up 7 right, they're expecting that that's where they're going to be going. And so they would look at their computer here, which would look something like this. And the closest thing they see to Ank is shaken. It's very common when we're out and about around the world that you get given a fix and you're having to kind of search to find the fix that gets very similar to the way you're used to hearing it. It's a very common thing. And usually what I do when I'm given direct, and I use this pretty much everywhere in the world, but if I'm given direct to a fix, even if I'm pretty sure that I got the right one, unless I'm just 100% positive, then I will read it back. It will go something like this. Let's say they said direct shaken. I would say direct shaken, Sierra Hotel November Kilo November. And then I read that back with my call sign and they say typically affirmative. And with that, what it does is it protects me, because then even if they didn't listen to what I said, I read back the name of the fix and the spelling like that. And so that way, when they say, yes, affirmative, go there, I load it up and I go directly there. if there was a mistake and I misheard the spellings, like you have this pilot and this controller where they misheard and came up with a different fix, had he spelled it out and the controller said, no, 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 not that fix, then they could have avoided this whole situation. But that's why I do it, because there are a lot of fixes that sound similar. That being said, I typically do it a lot less in the US, especially in the approach area. The workload starts to pick up, typically more focused than in cruise. So that's maybe something I might change after watching this scenario play out, because these two things are very similar. Now, I think it could be some things could be put in place to prevent this from happening from the FAA, but this is the situation that we're in right now. Now, the thing that's interesting is the pilot did read back 7 left, which is kind of strange because you could hear the hesitation while they were looking at their box here to see what fix the controller was asking him to go and do the approach after. But it is possible that the screen looked like this. When he looked up for that fix ank, the thing that he looked closest to would be shank, which is kind of what he read back. And it's possible that the next fix, which actually separates out to this 2 specific runways, was on the next page. So when he read back 7 left, 7 right was actually on the next page, and so he did not see it and therefore skipped it. So with the pilots loading up this approach, planning on 7 right, they have a expectation bias that that's what they're going to do. So they're trying to make this shank fit in to ank. So now with all that information in your brain, listen to the readback, the hesitation, what he's looking for. He's looking for a way for that expectation bias, for that fix to fit in to what he's loaded into his box.
Sir, Shank, cleared the outlet for 7 left, John 8862.
Now, should they have fixes close together, especially on approach, that sound even remotely similar or could be interpreted to be similar? No, absolutely not. And it's different, unfortunately, everywhere in the world. And in the US, we have some, I think, really cool approaches where these different fixes have different significant meanings. And sometimes they're sports teams. And sometimes, like in DC, you have a lot of military stuff. Anyway, it's cool, but is it the best overall plan? I don't know. It would be easier, like, if you had a combination of letters and numbers, very boring, but a combination of letters and numbers of 4 letters or 4 numbers or a combination thereof. That way there's no confusion. Direct Charlie 1 2 kilo. Oh, okay, great. It'd be impossible to have it where you're having to guess it, because in a lot of cases these fixes have similar names and you kind of have to guess, or it has a thing where it has a long spelled out name and you have to know which VOR that it is that you need to go there, which is like these old school navigation things that we used to use back in the day. So there's a lot of different ways that this could be done, but having names that are kind of similar where pilots start to try to fit them together, which is what happened here, it does happen. And that's why I always spell it out, because when I'm busy flying, shoving a peanut butter and jelly sandwich down my throat, I don't want to make a mistake. So I always just read back all the things, and that way when they say affirmative and I go there and there's a mistake, then I go, hey, I said it and then I spelled it out for you, so you're in trouble, not me. So that's how we got in this situation, but watch what happens when this approach controller transitions them over to tower.
Good morning, John 8862, heavy ILS 7 right.
Hi, 8862 Heavy, Anchor Star. Good morning, Raleigh 7 right, clear to land.
All right, clear to land, John 8862 heavy.
Op 3 was, the right's still closed, correct?
Top 3 affirmative right is still closed, and looks like it's still okay to be closed for a little while until that fog rolls through.
Roger.
Contact 6030 Heavy, turn left Charlie FA, if not continue down to Bravo.
Left Charlie, and
Contact 6030 Heavy, taxi park via Kilo Romeo.
alright, Charlie Kilo Romeo depart at 6030.
So typically when I go over to tower, I check in and I look at my box and I say, hey, Boeing 1237 right. The normal check-in. I'm verifying on my computer that I'm doing that. And then he says this.
Good morning, John 8862, heavy ILS 7 right.
And then the controller, also used to hearing a wide body 747 landing on 7 right, she just reads it back and confirms to these pilots the expectation bias that they had when they did that initial call in, because that's what they thought 150 miles ago that the runway they'd be landing on is 7 right, and she confirms it right here.
Hi, 8862 Hemi Anchor Star. Good morning, runway 7 right, clear to land.
Now here's the crazy and scary part about the whole thing. This controller is talking with the ops guys on a different frequency that the pilots are typically not able to hear. And they're talking about how bad the fog is over there while these guys are on the ground that are clearing out the runway, which means that the pilots, as they're getting ready to land, may not be able to see these ops bright yellow trucks with flashing lights on them because the fog, it can get really heavy there. So these pilots aren't going to visually be able to see something that's on the runway that would be inhibiting their ability to safely land. So when the ops guy calls the controller to confirm that 7 right is closed because he just heard this plane say that they were landing on 7 right, she says this to him.
Osprey, affirmative, right is still closed, and looks like it's still okay to be closed for a little while until that fog rolls through.
Roger.
Now here's something, I've done a lot of research and I've done a lot of training on leadership to prevent this exact situation. If the ops guy had said, okay, I was calling you because I think I just heard you clear that plane for 7 right and that's the runway that we're working on, then she could have gone, and then called the pilots and asked them and said, hey, just confirm you're landing on 7 left, correct? And they would have said, no, we're planning 7 right. Oh no, cleared 7 left. Then they could have quickly changed it, no problem. But he just ate it. And here is the problem. From his side, he should have said something. On the other side, the controller, when she hears that call coming from the guy on the ground, if she had just said, no, 7 right is closed, why do you ask? That would have opened up the door. The problem is, in life and in every social situation where there's a manager or leader, you have to be very careful with when people are talking to you and what they're saying. Sometimes they'll drop hints. And if you open that door for them and ask, why do you ask? Or what do you think? They'll open the door and tell you what it is that's going on. Sometimes I'm flying with a guy, he might be a newer pilot at our airline, but he might have a perspective or experience that on something that I'm not familiar with. So when we're going in somewhere, I try to be very aware to body language, tone of voice, way that they're acting, things that they're saying, hints that they might be dropping. For example, if I'm coming in and I'm planning a flaps 25 landing going in somewhere, and they say, hey, do you want me to get the performance for a flaps 30 landing? I'll usually go, no, why do you think we should do flaps 30? Just something like that, just to get them to open the door where they can come in and say, well, I think we might want to consider flaps 30 because the runway's kind of short, it's very hot down there, and so if we do a flaps 30 landing, we can do a lower brake setting and therefore keep the brakes cool, or we have an additional landing distance, or whatever. Now, what they say may or may not be useful or relevant. I've had people tell me like, hey, we should do a landing like this, and it's a terrible, dumb idea. But sometimes it's something that I'd never considered. So I always, no matter what it is, whether it's dumb or genius, I always want to listen to what they say and ask them, what are they thinking? Because it involves everyone. A lot of times we have 3 or 4 pilots, so bringing everybody in and having them work as a team. So if they say a dumb idea, I go, well, no, here would be why I would want to do it this way. Okay, cool. But give them the opportunity to tell you what's going on. If the controller had said, no, 7 right is closed, why do you ask? Then he would have had that opportunity. So if you're in a leadership position, this is kind of a tangent, but if you're in a leadership position and somebody's saying something to you that's like a hint, ask them why. Ask them, what would you do, or what are you thinking? And what that will do is that will open it up, create more of a team dynamic, and them being closer to boots on the ground situation, they may be able to help you, because this controller is obviously working this thing, not by herself, but she's handling all this stuff. And that teammate, that team player there that is part of the team, she just said, no, it's closed, and didn't ask why. Just something to be advised of. When I do a briefing with flight attendants, I try to tell them when we do the briefing, if you all hear something, smell something, something sounds wrong, call me during the sterile call. Like, something sounds right. You saw a little fire thing come out the engine while we're taxiing. Don't just sit on that. Like, call me and let me know, because I may not be aware of it. Now, if they call me and I go, yeah, I'm aware of it, I saw that, or hey, we're fixing that, great. But if you just sit on it, it's a problem. So I always try to include everybody that's on your team from the bottom to the top, because the more information you have as a leader or the person that's in charge of that situation, the better decisions that you can make. So by her, if she had just said, why do you ask? Would have avoided the whole thing. If he had said, hey, you just cleared him, like he had been more assertive, that would have solved the whole problem. Or if the pilots had heard this conversation, that would have solved the problem. But that's the situation. Now, often I mention the importance of knowing about situational awareness. So the fact that FedEx here is getting off on a taxiway that only you can get off from 7 left.
FedEx 6030 Heavy, turn left Charlie FA, if not continue down to Bravo.
That wouldn't trigger me to be thinking, oh, there's something wrong. Why are they getting off on that runway? Because sometimes you'll have different planes landing on different runways. I might be landing 7 right, they might be landing 7 left. That's normal. I don't know what kind of plane that they are, it's just their call sign, FedEx, so it could be really anything. So that's something that wouldn't trigger me as a, that seems strange. But let's say the 2 previous, let's say 747s, they're landing on 7 left, and I'm thinking, I just want to make sure we're landing on 7 right. Like I would do a confirmation there because something seems strange. We always land 7 right. Why are these 2 7-4s landing 7 left? But the fact that FedEx is doing it wouldn't really mean anything to me.
Giant 8862 Heavy, go around.
Giant 8862 Heavy, going around.
Giant 8862 Heavy, it looks like you're lined up for runway 7 right. Fly the published missed and contact approach on 118.6.
7 right, roger.
Well, they were lined up on that runway because that is the runway that they loaded and that you cleared them to land. Thankfully, something triggered, I'm guessing, on our system, and she was paying attention to see like, oh wait, that runway's closed, that runway's lined up for there, there's people on there, and she sent them around, and the pilots sound like they were handling pretty calm and cool, all considering. Go-rounds usually are a bit of a mess because it's not something you're planning, it's been a long day, you're in that mode of landing, so then you switch that all around into a takeoff mode. It can be, I've really messed them up, it can be a bit of an issue. And then for these guys that are sitting on the runway that are clearing off all this snow, it would be very unnerving. Just a couple weeks ago, I was flying with a guy who was a B-1 pilot, and he was talking about flying over in Afghanistan, and he said, we were talking about something, and he said, yeah, so we came in here and we did a show of force. And to me, show of force is like, you went and dropped some bombs. And I was like, oh, you bombed all these people? And he goes, no, show of force. We just fly over low and then we like blast them with our jet engines as we go over the head of them. And I'm like, that's a show of force? Like, he goes, yeah, it's very unnerving. And I was like, okay, I mean, I think bombs would be more unnerving, but whatever. Anyway, so if they do that as a show of force, as a thing to unsettle the enemy, you can imagine an ops guy hearing a 747 doing at the takeoff, basically when you're doing a go-round and doing another takeoff, going right over your head, because there's mountains right in front of 7, right? So they're doing a takeoff right over your head and then turning over. That would be very unnerving and kind of like a show of force for those guys on the ground that are just trying to like clear off some runways. I don't know. I would be very rattled for sure because I'd be thinking like, how did a plane almost land here? It would make me nervous. So here's what happens next.
Giant 8862 Heavy's with you on the nest off of 7 right.
Giant 8862 Heavy, Church, roger. Like runway 7 left. Fly heading 230, maintain 3000.
Heading 230, maintain 3000 for 7 left, Giant 8862 Heavy. Confirm heading 320 again for Giant 8862 Heavy.
Giant 8862 Heavy, heading 230, maintain 330. Expect 7 left.
230, 7 left, Giant 8862 Heavy.
Giant 8862 Heavy, turn right in 340.
Right turn 340, Giant 8362 Heavy.
Giant 8862 Heavy, you're 6 miles from Webby, turn right in 040. Maintain 2000 until established localizer cleared ILS from 7 left approach.
040, 2000 until established cleared the ILS 7 left, Giant 8862 Heavy.
Giant 8862 Heavy, contact tower on 18.3.
18.3, Giant 8862 Heavy, good day. Tower, Giant 8862 Heavy, ILS 7 left.
Giant 8862 Heavy, anchor tower, only 7 left, clear to land.
Clear to land, runway 7 left, Giant 8862 Heavy.
You can hear that emphasis on 7 left as they're saying that, and that's another thing that I try to listen to when I'm out flying. The emphasis, sometimes from the controller, sometimes from pilots that are around me, because what they're saying is this is not normal, so they're putting that emphasis on the word, and that's letting you know, like, hey, I'm going to pay extra close attention. They're using emphasis on that specific word, so they're doing that because in their mind, they're thinking, what did we mess up? You cleared us to land on 7, right? I guarantee you that somewhere after the go-around, after all that was done, they were like, why was she saying you were lined up on 7 right? Like, you would cleared us to land on 7 right. Obviously, if they listened back to the tapes or listened to all this, they would have realized, like, oh, we got cleared 7 left earlier than she cleared 7 right. Anyways, sometimes that happens as well. Sometimes you're switched on runway short term. So either way, that controller that's in the tower that's clearing them to land on 7 right would have confirmed anything. If the third or fourth pilot that was sitting back there was like, maybe they was supposed to be on 7 left. If they had been thinking about that, it would have gone all away as soon as that controller cleared them for 7 right. So that's why he's making this emphasis when he's calling 7 left.
040 2000 till established clear the ILS 7 left, Giant 8862 heavy.
This was a really close call, and honestly a great example of expectation bias and just how dangerous it is. That's why I always try to bring people in and have everybody speak up and tell everybody to speak up. I try to do it a lot. Early in my career, a guy taught me this expectation bias and the dangers of it. I've told some stories about that guy, PJ. He would always let me say something, even if he thought my idea was dumb. He really made that example for me about, like, speak up because maybe you see something that I don't see. And I've always done that, and I try to make other people do that as well, from the flight attendants or the ground ops guys or anything, because I've had ground ops guys tell me something, like we had a fuel leak once. It would have been a major problem had they not said something. He just made a comment. It was something like, man, your engines are sweating, or something, just something like that, and it would have been really easy to just ignore it. He didn't want to say, hey, you have a fuel leak, because he didn't really know, and he didn't want, people don't want to sound stupid. So he said something weird, and I go, wait, what exactly are you seeing? Oh yeah, no, it's just some water. I was like, water coming out of where? Asking those questions, like getting them to like tell you what's going on. And then when he told us, I was like, turn off the fuel boost pumps, shut down, go open the door, and there's just fuel just pouring out of the jet engine right towards the exhaust area. Had we ignited and turned the engine on, could have been a massive like flamethrower going out the back of our jet engine. It would have been a big problem. But because they did that, the whole flight canceled, and I got to go back to the hotel and eat some snacks. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.